Well, welcome back, kiddies. Today's tale is one filled with disappointment and dismay. The main character for our story is a 2023 Kawasaki KLX300. As you can see, it's seen better days. But alas, all is not lost. We're going to breathe new life into this machine and explain to you what happened, coming right up. Well, my customer was super excited when he went to the dealership, purchased this bike brand new. He loved it so much he took it over to a local shop, had the suspension redone front and rear, and at 400 miles, perfect time to go ahead and get the oil change, its first oil change. Well, it turns out the drain plug was not fully secure. So as riding down the road, drain plug fell out, and motor sort of locked up on him, shut down. Obviously realizing the mistake, he topped it off with oil and started it up, and it would start, but it just locks right back up again. So he took it to a local dealership around us, and they disassembled the bike, gave him some astronomically stupid price, which I believe was more than the cost of the bike, to rebuild the top end of this engine. And when he decided not to do that, they gave him his bike back like this, with all his parts just thrown into a box haphazardly, and then charged him a hefty fee. So that's how I ended up with it. The piston, cylinder, all that stuff looked real good. The head is toast, and the head itself is in pretty decent shape overall. However, oil starvation will smoke your cam journals. Intake cam's in decent shape. The exhaust cam, it could probably be cleaned up. Being this is a brand new bike, we're going to go ahead and just replace the exhaust cam. So we got a bunch of parts ordered. New exhaust cam, valve seals. Unfortunately, they don't make a gasket kit for this thing yet. It's too new. So we got genuine head gasket and base gasket. I've never in my lifetime held a brand new cylinder head. I mean, on a motorcycle anyway. Sweet. Alright, let's get this piston and cylinder together, then we can get to building this head. First things first, let's get a zip tie on our timing chain so we can fish it out. First thing I'm going to do is take my piston off. It's easier to get it down into the cylinder, get it started in the cylinder when it's free from the connecting rod. I'll take this circlip out. I want to put a rag just in case it falls. I don't want it to go down inside the crankcase. Be trying to fish that bad boy out. Gotta watch these things, they'll go flying. Alright, got the cylinder and piston all cleaned up. I want to install this piston into the cylinder as far as I can before putting on the connecting rod. It just makes it a lot easier. So maintaining our orientation, the water outlet being the exhaust side. And on your piston, we'll almost always have some sort of mark or a dot or an arrow pointing towards the exhaust side. So we'll just flip these. You can see the bottom of the cylinder has a little bit of a chamfer to it. Makes it a little bit easier trying to get the rings in. I'm going to use a little small flat blade screwdriver just to assist getting these rings in. Now we're only going to be able to go so far, because we still need to get our wrist pin in. Now we're ready to take it over and install it back on the bottom end. Alright, we got the piston and cylinder together. Now it's time to get this cylinder head sorted. What I'm going to do is get this head apart, swap all the valves, springs, and everything over to this head with a set of new valve seals. As you can see, this tappet won't come out. That's because these journals are damaged and rolled over from the starvation of oil. Honestly, it's difficult to see, but if you run your finger across it, you can definitely feel there's a burr on it. And these tolerances are so tight that if these things are rolled over just a little bit, you won't be able to get them out. This head's already damaged, so it's not really a big deal. We'll just get in here with a Dremel or small file and just take those edges off. All right, now we can get in the valve clamp, get all this apart. Now I got to pull out the valve seals, and at the bottom of these valleys is a spring seat, which is steel, that has to come out as well. Now they probably make a tool to get these off. I just got an old screwdriver that I kind of looped over so I can get underneath them and pop them out. Spring seats can be a little bit tricky getting them out because it's a very close fit on all of this stuff, and when there's oil around the spring seats, the oil will have a tendency to grab onto the seats themselves and hold them down, so it's kind of difficult. This magnet is just too fat to get in there. A lot of times what I find works best is a little bit of brake clean to break that oil viscosity up, and then just blasting it with air will have a tendency to remove it. Now I'm just going to finish stripping this head down, swapping everything over to the new head. Now what I want to do is check these valves just to make sure that they're not bent. They shouldn't be. Easy way to do this, chuck them up in your drill, just go real slow. And you want to look for any wobbles in the shaft or the head. This one looks good. What I'm going to do is just hit it with a little bit of a Scotch-Brite pad just to take some of the crust off of it. Now that I'm done with my cleaning and physical examination of the valves, we're going to go ahead and lap them in. And what that basically is we're going to use a valve grinding compound, put it on the face of the valve, we're going to rub it against the seat, and that'll tell us where our valve seats are sitting on our valve. And ideally what we're looking for is a thin line right in the center of the face. What this stuff here is like a liquid sandpaper. Put a little bit of oil on the stem so she slides easily in the guide. So what we need to use now is what they call a lapping spindle. And it's basically just a stick with a suction cup on the end. I hate these things. I don't know if they're just cheap ones. They don't tend to stick to the valve too well. They keep falling off, but this is the normal way of doing it. Sometimes if you have room at the top, you can actually put your drill on it and use the drill very lightly to spin your valve. Another way would be to use a piece of rubber hose that's a tight fit on the valve stem, and you can kind of walk it back and forth that way. But let's see how we do with these spindles. They're supposed to stick to the valve, and then we just kind of this one's calling me a liar because it's staying on. Normally they just come right off. You get any kind of oil or any of this grinding compound underneath this suction cup and they don't stick. So once you've done that a bunch of times, you're going to pull this out. You're going to clean your valve real well. And we're going to look at that line. And that is absolutely spectacularly perfect. Nice dull gray line right in the center of the valve face. Once I've lapped them into the seat, I want to make sure I keep them back in the same exact spot. So just take note of that. And now I'll just do it to the rest of them. After you get all this stuff lapped in, it is imperative that you take this in some hot soapy water and wash it, wash it, wash it. Once you think it's clean, wash it again. Like I said, this stuff is like fine sandpaper paste, and if this gets down inside any of these cracks and ends up in your engine, it's going to do a lot of damage real quick. Now that everything's clean, we can start reassembling our head. I'll just do one for you. We'll get your spring seat. New valve seals. I use a pick, go through the seal, go through the guide, and then once it's on there, I can just use my finger and plop her on. Oil your valve stem. I'm just going to set the head up on a couple of blocks of wood. This is going to keep the valves off the table. What we're going to do is tap the valve stems lightly with a tool that fits on top of it. You could use a 1/4-inch extension if it'll fit in there. And we just want to lightly tap these. We just want to lightly tap these. Seat those keepers in there nice. At this point here, I'm going to fit these camshafts and get these valves shimmed. Before we start setting these cams in, we're going to use some Permatex Ultra Slick. This stuff is ultra slick. And we're going to put that on all the journals, anywhere where this thing would make a metal to metal contact. And honestly, it doesn't take that much. My goal here is going to be put the camshafts in, everything lubricated, and get the cam bridge or cam cap back on and make sure that nothing is binding before we even get into shimming these valves. So this cap is going to be on and off multiple times. Well, they feel good. They got a light drag on them. It's always a good idea to check your service manual to find out clearances and the specs that they require on these things. You can use plastic gauge in the journals to make sure that you have enough clearance. Let's get it back apart and get these valves shimmed. So we've got to start somewhere. I'm going to start back where the original factory shims and the original locations, and we'll take our measurements from there and see how we need to adjust. All right, we got our tappets, shims in. We'll put our cams back in. So on the front of the gears of the camshaft, there's going to be alignment marks. If you look on the exhaust, it says EX, EX, 2 lines. Those will line right up with the head. Same thing with the intake side. We'll line the 2 intakes. And this is where the cams are going to sit when you're taking your measurements. And where you're going to take your measurements is between the cam lobe and the tappet. But first we need to get the cam cap back on and torqued properly. Kawasaki does you a favor here, and they number the sequence in which they want them torqued. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And once you have them torqued properly, reset your timing marks, and let's get our measurements. Where we're looking to take our measurements is right between the tappet and the cam lobe on both of the exhaust. Kawasaki's calling for 0.15 millimeter to 0.24 millimeter. As long as it falls within that spec, you're okay. I have a 0.15 and I got a 0.23, so I don't have a 0.24, but as long as the gap is between these two, we're in good shape. And that's actually got a little bit of drag on it. That one's a little bit thinner. That one's a little bit looser, but not bad. So it goes in. 023 does not go in. So our exhaust falls within that parameter. Our intake's going to be measured the same way. However, it's going to be 0.10 to 0.19. And I have a 0.10 and I have a 0.18. So as long as it falls in between there, again, we're good. 10 goes in slick. 19 will not go in. So these actually don't require any shimming whatsoever. They're perfect just the way they are. Now let's just say on your intake measurements, it was larger than the specification. In other words, larger than 0.19 millimeter. What we would need to do, and there's a chart in the service manual on how to do this. Sometimes it's just a little bit of trial and error. That's how I like to do it. But you would have to take your cam cap back off, pull your cam off, pull your tappet off, and you'd want to put a larger shim, which would close that gap up. A lot of times the shims, if they've been in here, they don't have any markings on them, so you have to get a micrometer or something along those lines to get a measurement on the shim. And you'd probably just go with your next size larger shim. Now, obviously, vice versa, if it was too tight, which is normally the case, because as the valve seats wear and the valves wear, the stem will push up closer and closer to the camshaft, which will tighten that gap up. Obviously, in that case, same thing. Pull your cam caps off, pull your cams out, pull your tappets out, and you're going to go with a thinner shim to move that tappet farther away from the camshaft. But again, for me, I just like doing the trial and error deal. There are charts in the manual, and you can also do mathematician stuff if you'd like to do that yourself to figure out what size shim you would need. But at this point here, we are ready to bolt this head back on and get our cam timing set up. On your head bolts, put a little bit of oil on the threads and on your washers. Next, we're going to torque our 8mm head bolts in a cross pattern in 2 stages. First stage, we'll do 11 foot-pounds. Second stage, we're going to take it up to 34. The smaller M6 bolts, we're going to tighten those to 106 inch-pounds, or if you want to get technical about it, it's like one easy ooga dooga. Well, our first order of business, making sure that the engine is on top dead center. What does that mean? Well, that basically means that the piston is at the top of its travel. In other words, it can't go any higher without starting to go back down again. If you remove the caps on your stator cover, there's one to put a 17mm socket on to turn your crankshaft. Second one is to verify your timing mark. What you're looking for is a mark that lines up with the top of the case, and it has a T on it. Once you got that set up, you're on a roll with a side of slaw. Start with our exhaust camshaft, and we want to do this without rotating this engine at all. And we're going to get the timing marks exactly like we had them when we were checking for the valve clearances. Next, we'll get our intake cam in, being sure to keep the front of the chain taut, or tight in layman's terms. Sometimes this stuff is trial and error. Got both the cams in, re-verified that we're still on top dead center and nothing moved. You can see the EX mark lines across the head, and the intake mark lines up across the head, keeping the front half of the chain tight. The back half can move and have the slack in it, but we want the front of the chain to be tight. Once this all looks good, put your cam cap back on, torque it down 106 inch-pounds. Cam cap's torqued, timing is still dead on. I got both my timing chain tensioners in. Next thing we want to do on this thing is we're going to rotate it a couple of full revolutions just to make sure nothing's binding. So it feels real good. I'm going to get my oil lines back on and connected and start putting the rest of this thing back together. Before I put my valve cover back on, I'm going to hook a jump box up to the starter. Since I have a lot of the electronics unplugged, I'm not going to run the starter through the motorcycle. I'll actually just jump it off. And I'll run it for a little bit and make sure I'm getting oil up to my journals. What you want to look for is make sure where the journals are that you got oil coming out, and you can definitely see this thing is pumping oil like crazy up here. So everything's lubricated nicely, working the way it's supposed to. Well, as you can see, I spent some time figuring out where all these wires go that were just kind of hanging everywhere. Checked all the fluids, got everything topped off, and got it together for the most part. All we got to do now is hook up the battery and smash on that start button. Battery's dead. Alright, let's try this again. Sounds pretty good. I'll run a few heat cycles through it. Then we'll take it out for a ride, just run it through the gears and make sure everything's working properly.